Final news topic of the week. Not exactly news as such. Well, it is kind of. Gamescom recently, obviously, I went over to Germany, met up with John, and I gave him the One X two-player Pro
Hold on, here we go.
because, yeah,
Oh, got it.
I gave him the One X two-player Pro because, John, you were really interested in checking out gaming, a handheld gaming experience that runs on Windows 11. And I wanted
Exactly.
you to have a machine that wouldn't have like issues like lack of memory, for example.
Right.
This One X two-player Pro's got 32 gigs of memory, Ryzen 7840U, so it's standard fare, really. It's like a
Mhm.
ROG Ally in a different form factor with more memory, basically.
Yep.
How are you getting on with it? What is your takeaway overall of the portable Windows gaming
Yes.
experience?
So I had used a ROG Ally before, but only temporary, only a bit, right? And I could see right there that, yeah, this is not great, but it was manageable. When you actually sit down with one of these things from the beginning and you go through the whole, like, restore it back to factory presets and like try to get stuff installed, I found the experience to be extremely annoying. Uh, Basically, if you don't have a mouse and keyboard, it
Yeah,
fights you
yeah,
every step of the way. Like even
absolutely.
simple things like, oh, I want to bring up the on-screen keyboard. Sometimes it would come up, sometimes it didn't. I couldn't figure out why for a while, and I was just like, I couldn't like I couldn't even log into Steam at some point because I was like, I can't. It won't bring up the darn keyboard.
Yes,
And I was doing this in a place where I didn't have a keyboard handy, so I just could not actually get this stuff working. And I was getting so frustrated with just the general use of it and like going through everything, and just that part sucked. It's really bad as like a portable kind of device if that's all you have. But once you connect a mouse and keyboard to it, to just use it like a normal PC, then it's a surprisingly impressive little device where you feel like, okay, this is like, it's basically like a laptop in a different form factor. And once you actually get the game sort of configured and working, then it's like okay enough to use. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel great going through Steam or any other things, but you can still do it okay. It's just the setup process that really sucks. And then once you actually play in the games, it's fine. But then it also reminded me of things like that I take for granted on the Steam Deck, like pre-compiled shaders. Games have to go through the whole shader compilation process. It takes a long time on a system like this. Uh, there's more stuttering
yeah.
issues that I encountered on some games. It felt more like a typical Windows PC experience, but with less horsepower. But that's not to say that the horsepower here didn't allow for some impressive results. Like I was surprised that I was able to get Quake 2 RTX running at 60 FPS on this thing.
Yeah,
And it was actually like really smooth and nice. And it's just like seeing that running like on the Steam Deck, there's ways to get it up and running, but you're lucky to get like 30 FPS on there. And that's with the resolution cranked even further down. So it's not a good experience. Whereas on this thing, it's just, 60's pretty good, I would say, for that, right? So another one that I tested on here was Black Myth Wukong, of course, which is very heavy game, as we all know, and with sort of a medium highish sort of settings. Uh, I was able to sort of cap it down at 30 FPS and get a really nice stable experience, I would say. If I chop the settings down a bit more without a cap, then I could actually get north of 60. But there's a point in that game where you just sacrifice too much detail and it ends up looking pretty gnarly, I would say.
right.
But I was just impressed to be able to get a nice, pretty playable, good looking experience on a handheld like this. You could also turn on the frame generation if you wanted. And then it's like
Right.
you kind of get
Okay.
that PS5 experience. And it's
PS5.
true, the frame rate does indeed go up significantly, and you can actually keep the higher settings and still get a smooth performance visually, but it feels quite laggy, I would say.
Hmm.
So in that case, I feel like just 30 FPS is actually better. So that's interesting for sure. Beyond that, though, I tried a bunch of just random games. I tried Need for Speed 2015 just out of curiosity because that was one I never got working on the Steam Deck for some reason, and that looked awesome running on this thing. And just the overall performance package profile was quite nice, And this thing even has these like detachable controllers, like
Yeah.
like the Switch basically. Although you
Hmm.
got to use this like little battery pack thing to even operate them. It does not support them like the Switch,
Yeah,
where you
that's
just
kind of weird, isn't it?
yeah, like I think the reason is probably maybe to keep the weight down
Yeah.
because this thing is already extremely thick and chunky. Uh, it is a lot bigger than the Steam Deck, and I feel like putting batteries and extra stuff into each of those controllers would only increase that, right? And I think they wanted to avoid that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, my experience from this was just like, okay, this is cool. This additional horsepower is nice, and it's nice to have a little portable PC that you can just. I was able to plug it in using USB-C into my 240 hertz OLED monitor, and it runs over USB-C at 1440p 240.
Yeah, it's
And
amazing.
there was actually a number of games that I was able to play at 240 FPS when plugged
Like
into
what?
this thing, like Doom 2016.
Okay,
I made
cool.
cuts to the res, of course, but with the right settings, it runs at 240 FPS, which for a little device like this, that kind of blew my mind that I was able to get a frame rate that high on a game that
Hmm.
looked that good, right? And then,
Nice.
all like the modern night dive stuff, zero problems, just like pushing that up to 240. So it's actually like a weirdly potent little device. Certainly better than any of like the typical like business laptops that we have floating around at the offices and such, right? Like it's great. It's a nice little device. But yeah, in terms of the overall experience, SteamOS is king. SteamOS
Yeah.
feels like a console. It's like
Well,
a
obviously
console with flexibility.
we've got Oliver's video coming of Bazite, which is essentially a SteamOS version for Windows-based handhelds, right, Oliver? Which should hopefully address some of those issues. But I think
Yes.
fundamentally, it also means that, well, what can I say? If there is going to be an Xbox handheld coming, they've got a massive mountain to climb in actually making it into a machine that doesn't feel like a Windows machine,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But you do want that compatibility.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts so far, Oliver?
Sadly, that's true. That's true. I mean, I used my ROG Ally for, over a year now without running a variant of SteamOS essentially on it. And I really didn't know what I was missing, I guess, because when you actually run Windows on it and then run Bazite immediately after, you realize just how much more flexible, fast, scalable, useful, genuinely good SteamOS is relative to Windows. Now, Bazite is not SteamOS. Bazite is Linux plus the Steam Big Picture view plus all the features and interface from SteamOS. So it is basically SteamOS. It's not SteamOS technically, but they ported everything over. It runs and looks just like SteamOS. It's about as stable as SteamOS is, to be honest. It feels very, very good. It's just a way better experience than Windows. No difficulty with closing games, opening games, window management, no more mouse simulation with the right stick, games suspend and resume properly, great control over different display options like frame rate caps, TDP modes, everything in SteamOS, VRS, FSR, brightness, volume, everything. It's all very nicely mapped out, all super convenient, just like the Steam Deck. In terms of like things that are possibly issues, I mean, the installation is a little
Yeah.
more challenging maybe than some people would like. For me, it was fairly easy. I'm using the ROG Ally, which I gather is quite well supported. It's very, very popular, obviously, very well supported. I don't think there's the potential to brick anything, but if you do run into problems in that installation process, I get the sense that you might have some difficulty with getting that device actually to install Bazite correctly. But for me, it was not too difficult. It's not that much more difficult, honestly, than installing Windows on a Steam
Okay.
Deck and the inverse situation. But yeah, I mean, it's very, very good. Very, very good. I'd certainly recommend it to anyone who wants to give it a shot. But John, I would recommend one more thing in your Windows handheld
What's
journey,
that?
possibly, and also maybe your Steam Deck handheld journey, which is maybe to try out local streaming with Moonlight and Sunshine,
Right.
because that's personally how I've been gaming a lot on those devices these days. I actually do not play very many games natively. I'd rather just boot into Steam Big Picture mode using Moonlight with the game running on my Windows desktop with the high-end CPU and GPU combination there. Doing 120 hertz streaming or 90 hertz streaming basically flawlessly to either device. Running games at those
That's awesome.
Frame rates at 120 FPS, 90 FPS, maxed out settings. A lot of games can run very well on a higher end system. Obviously, they're not going to run nearly that well on the device itself, right? So that's a huge trade-off. And actually, image quality is great. I'm running it at I think 150 megabytes per second, I believe, on those devices. You get a pretty big, pretty nice level of image quality there, and latency is not too much of an issue. And I think to whatever extent there are increases in latency, they're offset by being able to target much higher frame rates than you would on the device itself. So yeah, I mean, I think that works very well. It works reasonably well in Windows, but I think in SteamOS, possibly it runs even a little bit better, because you can just open it just like any other app, close it like any other app. You don't end up with any weirdness, full screen problems. I also noticed some frame pacing problems in Windows with Moonlight that I did not notice in SteamOS or in Basic, which is not SteamOS, but it is basically SteamOS. Just a way smoother experience. So yeah, I also think I said 150 megabytes per second. I think it's 150 megabits per second. Just a slight difference. But I mean, the image quality is, in most games, in most circumstances, it is so close to native as to not really be significantly different, in my view. It is a very high level of image quality. If you're doing 1080p 120, for sure, on something like a ROG Ally, looks very, very good, very, very smooth. You're not going to see any kind of compression artifacts. It looks very good.
That's awesome.
Cool.